and on behalf of the entire library system, I want to welcome all of you to the event, and welcome to those of you viewing at home. This is a very special evening. We're so thrilled to be hosting our 15th year of Gulf Coast Reads. Gulf Coast Reads is our annual reading initiative where we encourage our communities to read and discuss the same book during the month of October and attend events like book clubs, thematic programs, and events like our signature event tonight. You can read more about the program on gulfcoastreads.org. A little feedback there. We are so grateful to Jennifer Mathhieu for being here with us this evening. A big thanks to her and her publishers at Penguin Random House. Just to tell you a bit about how the evening is going to run, in a few minutes we'll invite Jennifer up to the stage along with this evening's moderator, Leanne Jennings. They'll have a chat that I know you'll enjoy, and then we will open it up for audience questions. And if you're watching online and have a question, just go ahead and pop it into the chat, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. At around 7:45, we'll ask everyone to line up along this wall for a book signing. And our friends from the Google Bookshop are here, so thank you so much. And if you need a book, you can just stop at their table and get one, and then move on to the signing table. Just a couple of acknowledgements. I want to thank the Harris County Friends of the Library for their support. They're here with us tonight. And also want to announce that HCPL has a new foundation. So there are many ways to help support the library. You can visit the Friends at hcfol.org and become a member for as little as $25 a year with some great perks. And please also visit our foundation website at hcplfoundation.org to learn about the great things they're doing, including a fundraising lunch in November featuring Houston's own Catherine Center. We'll be talking about her new book. I want to thank the team here at the West University Senior Services for their hospitality and for this wonderful space. And thanks to all the team members at HCPL who helped to work on tonight's event, especially Celeste Blue, who facilitates our committee meetings throughout the year. Gulf Coast Reads would not be possible without our working committee. So I'd like to invite Celeste up to the podium for a moment just to tell you a little bit more about their work.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, my name is Celeste Blue. I work with Jennifer Schwartz in the programming department of Harris County Public Library. It has been a true joy to lead the Gulf Coast Reads Committee for the past 4 years, but I have had amazing predecessors, including Jennifer Schwartz and Elaine Plotkin, who began the Gulf Coast Reads Committee in 2011, right? The Gulf Coast Read Committee is truly a one-of-a-kind group. It's the only group that I know of that we've looked into, one-of-a-kind in Texas. It's comprised of representatives from libraries and literary organizations across the Gulf Coast. Many of our members are actually here today. If you are in the Gulf Coast Reads Committee, please stand up. And we'd like to recognize you right now. Thank you so much. Libraries and literary organizations. While Gulf Coast Reads Month is in October, this month, we plan for it a full year in advance. Our committee meets monthly starting in November, so next month we'll start the next season for 2026 to go through a set of procedures to select titles, read them, narrow them down, get new readers, narrow them down even more, send to the public vote, and in the summer, we create a variety of resources and programming to go along with the themes of Gulf Coast Reads before our big announcement in August. Our committee of librarians selects the title, of course, as you may have seen, that has broad appeal to adults in our communities, is recognized in authoritative and professional journals, is available in multiple formats for print to downloadable content, and preferably is available in multiple languages. The title should also lend itself to related programming about the themes or subjects within. So we do go through a very lengthy process to find the Gulf Coast Reads book. The Gulf Coast Reads Reading Initiative's goal is to encourage our communities to read the same title during the month of October in order to encourage readers to come together in discussions about it with our neighbors, coworkers, friends, and their families, as well as in classrooms and libraries throughout our regions, just like we are doing today. If you are a librarian or a literary professional and are interested in joining us for the 2026 season, please email Jennifer Schwartz, as my last day of leading the committee will be this Friday. But I hope to continue to collaborate with them for our next season. Thank you again to our community for being here, our book clubs, our librarians, for all of your support to make Gulf Coast Reads a success year and year and year after year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Celeste. We'll now get ready to start the program. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about tonight's speakers. Our moderator for tonight, Leanne Jennings, is HCPL's Youth Literacy Services Specialist. She makes a lot of really cool programs happen throughout the system. Before joining us here at HCPL, Leanne was a middle school math teacher for 2 years, serving at both Fort Bend ISD and Pasadena ISD. Jennifer Mathhieu is the critically acclaimed author of 7 novels for young adults, including Moxie, which is now a major motion picture directed by Amy Poehler, I believe available on Netflix. Her books have been translated into over 20 languages. A former journalist, Matthieu is a graduate of Northwestern and has been a high school teacher for nearly 20 years. She lives with her family here in Houston. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer and Leanne.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Leanne. I'm not Butler. This is our lovely author here, Miss Jennifer. So just real quick, I want to make sure that I'm projecting enough that our people in the back can hear me just fine. Okay, perfect. So Miss Jennifer Mathhieu, would you like to just tell us a little bit about your book, Faculty? That's why I don't have a mic. Should I try it now?
Okay, let's hold our breath, guys. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go. Is it working? Okay, excellent. So sorry. Well, I guess we're all awake now. First of all, I'm Jennifer Mathhieu, and I want to thank, of course, the Harris County Library System. I want to thank Blue Willow Books. I want to thank Leanne for being in conversation with me. And most of all, I want to thank all of you on a Monday evening to come and take time out of your day. That's a real treat and an honor for me that you're here. So yeah, just my little elevator pitch for the Faculty Lounge, if you haven't read it. It's my love letter to teachers and to any adult who works in school. It follows a large comprehensive public high school in Houston over the course of a single year. And the inciting incident is that a substitute teacher, well into his 80s, who used to teach at the high school, dies of natural causes in the Faculty Lounge. And the school had been a very special place for him when he worked there, and he asks that his ashes be spread in the courtyard of the school. And this happens, and it causes some drama, and, to say the least. And so each chapter sort of focuses on a different person in the building that works there. And it's really, as I said, it's my love letter. It's you know, so much of media likes to portray teachers as sort of these saviors, right? When you think of movies like Stand and Deliver or Dead Poet Society, and I like those movies, but you know, the teachers are these saints or these martyrs. Or in these times, we often hear, you know, they're groomers or they're indoctrinators. And the truth is, teachers and people who work in schools are just human beings, flawed human beings that feel a calling to serve and work with young people. And so it's my attempt to show their full humanity in this book. And that's what it's about, yeah.
Excellent. So how did you come up with that premise of a substitute teacher, a lifelong teacher, dying in the school? How did you come up with that?
Well, I will be totally honest, and writers are always looking for ideas, right? And real life supplies many of my ideas. I was a teacher. I'm no longer at Bel Air High School, but I was at Bel Air High School for 8 years. And there was a substitute there, an older gentleman, quite old, who had taught. He had not taught at Bel Air, so that's the difference there. But he was, you know, we would look at him and think, is he going to make it today? Like, and he was so sweet, but he was so, you know, kind of wizened and kind of, you know, I worried about him. And he would take naps in the faculty lounge. And there was a colleague of mine, and he and I, you know, and if you are a teacher, you work in school, you know, we have a sick sense of humor, some of us, right? That's how we get through the day, especially if you teach high school, I think. And so we're in the lounge, and we'd be like, do we need to hold a mirror under this guy? Like, is he okay? Like, what happens if something, you know? And it just, the idea struck me, like, what if he were to go to his reward right there in the faculty lounge? And so I had this idea, and I went home, and I actually wrote, the first chapter of the book was originally just a short story. And the book actually was a collection of short stories, and that's how I wrote it, with each chapter just kind of about a different person in the school. The ashes incident wasn't even in the original collection of stories. But that was how the idea came to me, and I do believe that gentleman is alive and doing well. Probably, and I don't remember his last, I don't know how to get in touch with him. I would love to tell him that he inspired the book. I don't know if he would like that. But yeah, that's how it came to be.
Awesome. Yeah. I love that. And you mentioned too about how, like you said, there's a lot of teachers in media, either the saints or the devils, pretty much. And there's a lot of media nowadays, so there's Faculty Lounge, there's Abbott Elementary. Do you feel that media can actually realistically portray what it's like in a school on a daily basis, or do you think it's still very fantastical?
Well, Abbott Elementary, I'm a huge fan of Abbott Elementary, and if you haven't watched it and you work in a school, definitely watch it. In fact, when my agent pitched this book, she pitched it as Abbott Elementary meets Election, if you know the Tom Perrotta novel or the movie with Reese Witherspoon. So she pitched it as Abbott Elementary meets Election. And I think Abbott Elementary is one of the closest I've seen in terms of really capturing the way that teachers especially can feel, especially if you're working in a public school that's not funded well, where you're trying to make it work for the kids and you've got all of these forces against you. I think that one captures it pretty well. There's a book from a long time ago called Up the Down Staircase. Some of you will recognize it. I can't remember the author's name right now, but I think it was published in the 1960s, and it follows a young teacher during her first year at a large public high school, I think in New York City. And I remember reading it, and parts of it are very, very dated in terms of like, they get memos in their mailboxes if they don't email, right, obviously. But I shouldn't have been, but I was stunned by how much of it was still so relevant. So if you've never read Up the Down Staircase, that's one that I also think gets it really right. But most of what I've seen does not. Yeah. It just doesn't. And I know they're trying to make fun stories, or they're trying to make inspirational stories. But unfortunately, I don't think there's enough out there about teachers. There's a new one now, English Teacher on Hulu. And I love it. I've seen both seasons. It's not realistic at all. I think it's funny, and I think it's like candy for my brain, but I don't necessarily think it's really accurate. But
what is it like having one of your books turned into a movie? Because like we had, I think mentioned earlier, your novel Moxie was turned into a Netflix movie. What is that like to experience that?
oh my gosh, it was the most surreal thing that's ever happened to me, truly, truly. And I was in the faculty lounge of Bel Air High School when I got the call. So it actually sold to Amy Poehler's production company before the book even came out, which was really wild. So sometimes, when your agent or your book to film agent thinks that there's promise, they'll take the manuscript out before the book even goes out. And so she had taken Moxie out. The book was going to be published, we had a pub date and everything, but it was out there with this book to film agent, and I of course, you always hope, every author hopes every book will become a movie, but I knew that the odds were slim, and so I was sitting in the lounge grading papers, and my agent calls me, and she said, I need you to know that Amy Poehler's production company is interested in Moxie. And I literally wrote down with my red pen on a random piece of paper, Amy Poehler. Like I was going to forget or something, I was going to take notes. And so if you're an Amy Poehler fan, I can tell you she is one of the nicest people on earth. She's the daughter of 2 public school teachers herself. And very down to earth. I got to go to the set. They were filming in October of 2019, so it was like right before COVID. And I got to visit the set, and I got to there was a cameo. I play a chemistry teacher. You really cannot see me, and that's probably for the best. But it was so surreal, and I remember going to the set, and I was so nervous. And they were doing my hair and makeup in the hair and makeup trailer for my little cameo, and I told the hair and makeup people, I'm so nervous. And I remember the hair guy said, and the makeup lady, they both said it to me. They were like, we have jobs today because you wrote a book. And that put me at such ease because I was like, I never thought about it that way. They were so gracious. And it was so fun. It was super bizarre. I burst into tears when I saw Rockport High School, the set, the world that I created. The movie is a bit different from the book, but I felt she captured the spirit of the book so well. And I was really pleased with the adaptation. But it is a surreal thing, for sure. Very strange.
And what is it like from writing YA like Moxie to now writing your first adult novel? What was that like?
In a lot of ways, it's not different. In a lot of ways, it's still, you know, the world that I'm creating is in my brain, and I'm thinking about it all the time, and I'm, you know, meditating on it, and the characters are really real in my mind. These people are, you know, this is why writers are a little cuckoo, right? Because the characters are real people in our heads. And so you know, in that way, it felt very similar. Maybe the biggest difference is that when I write young adult novels, they are first person present, because there's a real immediacy when you're a teenager and you're writing for teenagers. Everything feels like in the now, in the moment. With this book, you know, past tense, third person, it felt a little different. But it was a little bit freeing in a way. And of course, writing for adults, I can tackle certain topics that I can't tackle with young people, right? Although, you know, my YA books, I think, they're fortunate enough, so they've tackled some tough subjects. But in a lot of ways, it was not different at all, really. The writing process was similar, you know, in terms of the way that I craft a first draft and the way that I plan, the way that I edit, revise. So in some ways, it was really not too different.
Excellent. So speaking of those difficult topics that you can address in adult books, in the book there is a school shooting drill, and the teachers kind of just seem unfazed by it. They're like, all right, this is drill number 20, all right, whatever. So I have to refer to my notes, sorry. The teachers just seem unfazed. Is that how teachers, for the most part, kind of view those scary drills nowadays in public schools?
You know, unfortunately, yes. I think it's, you know, I've had people say, oh, it's so hard, it must be so difficult, and I'm so cynical about it now. I'm not afraid to be political. I think we've let down our kids, and now I work with teachers who did drills when they were kids, right? I mean, that's how long we've been fighting this horrible epidemic of gun violence in our country, and we aren't doing anything of real substance, in my opinion, to stop it, and it's heartbreaking to me. And yeah, I have reached a point where I have sort of, I don't want to say, I wouldn't suggest that I've numbed out to the horror of it, but the drills themselves, you know, I remember reading about Joan Baez refusing to do the duck and cover drills because she thought they were so ridiculous. Like, she refused, and I thought to myself, what if we just all refuse to do these drills and protest? Like, fix the problem, don't make us do these drills. Yeah, I don't know, I've got difficult feelings about it, and so when I wrote that chapter, actually, if you've read The Faculty Lounge, this isn't really a spoiler, but there's a young teacher who recalls being locked out of a classroom during what they were not sure was a drill or not. She was in the bathroom when they went into lockdown, and she can't get back into the classroom. And she's remembering this when she's on a lockdown in the book. And that actually happened to me as a teacher, where we had an unexpected lockdown at Bel Air, and I had a student who was in the bathroom, and she tried to get back in, and I couldn't let her in, because the protocol is you cannot, because you don't know who's on the other side trying to use her to get into the classroom. And she's begging to be let in, and I couldn't let her in. And I remember at the end of the day just breaking into tears, and she was crying, and it was horrible. And so that element of the book, that's probably the most real thing from my real life that ended up in the book. Yeah.
Are there any other tricky situations like that the public might not be aware that teachers are experiencing? Like, we're all familiar with school drills, like fire drills, shooter drills, all those things. But is there a secret drill that teachers are having? I don't know if
We do tornado drills. We do tornado drills.
Yeah.
No, I can't think of anything necessarily there that people wouldn't know about. But I do think people might, if you haven't been in a public school in Texas in a long time, you might not know how hard it is for teachers and people and other adults who work in schools. We have a legislature that just simply refuses to properly fund us. When I became a teacher over 20 years ago, it was a bipartisan issue. We had members across the aisle that believed in funding public schools. We finally we had not had a significant increase in the amount per student that we get in our classroom since 2019. And then this year they raised it $55. Well, that doesn't help inflation, right? They did give teachers raises, which I do appreciate, but ultimately, you know, when I started in this business, I had 135 students. double the planning time. We could afford a copy clerk. Now I have 185 students, half the planning time, no copy clerk. There's a real effort, in my opinion, to demonize and starve public schools in this state. And it's very disconcerting to me as a public educator. And so that would be the one thing I would say. If you're not aware of how our public schools are being funded, if you're not aware of how they're being treated, in my opinion, that should be a truly bipartisan issue. If we don't have an educated populace, then how do we have a functioning state? So if you're not aware, look into that. If that matters to you, we do need people to advocate for public schools.
And in your book too, yeah, right? In your book, you write about several teachers and several adults in an education facility. There are some newbies, some veterans, some who love teaching, some who aren't in love with teaching so much, some who are still in the classroom, some who aren't. How many of those characters have you been over the course of your teaching career? You know what I mean? Like, at one point you were a new teacher, and now you're not so much of a new teacher. But how many of those can you specifically relate to?
I think the character, in terms of my teaching and how I feel about my profession, if you've read the book, it's probably Miss Fletcher, who's the veteran English teacher. I think I relate with her the most in that she's been teaching for a little over 20-something years. When you meet her, and you meet her in flashback when she's young and idealistic. And I started teaching when I was 28, and I knew immediately I loved it. I knew immediately. I was like, this is it. This is the vocation for me. I felt called to it. And I still do. But because of the challenges I just mentioned in the answer to the last question, it's getting harder and harder to fight burnout. I'm just being very frank with all of you. And there's a moment in the book where Ms. Fletcher says she's not sure. On her hardest days, she's not sure if she would recommend to someone to become a teacher. At the same time, she was grateful that she had done it. She was grateful that she hadn't gone, because her parents wanted her to go into law or finance. And she says in the book, in the end though, she was glad she had not gone into law or finance. And that's how I feel. I know that at the end of my career, and certainly at this point, I look back with so much pride. And I know that I made the right choice 21 years ago to enter this profession. But it gets harder every year. And I think that sort of feeling of a little bit of burnout, a little bit of like, where are we going? I could relate with that with Ms. Fletcher.
One of your characters, Mr. Rayfield, he is, I think he's like a 5-year veteran.
Yeah.
So Mr. Rayfield, during one of his chapters, or during his chapter it is, he says, this isn't the sort of job you should stick with if you aren't good at it. Do you agree with that statement? How do you feel about that statement?
100%. 100%. Because first of all, it's way too hard. So why would you put yourself through this job if you're not getting something out of it? Second of all, the stakes are too high. You're impacting the lives of young people. And if you can't, I remember being in a faculty lounge at a school that I worked with, and there was a young teacher there. It was her second career, so she wasn't young, but she was young to the profession. And I remember she came in, and I was new, and I don't know if she thought maybe there's like a new ear to hear me. And she talked about the kids in a way that really bothered me. And I remember saying to her, if you don't like this job, and if you don't like the kids, I said it nicely, but I basically said, you need to get out of here. Because there's young people and their lives and their egos and their vulnerable little souls are at risk. And if you can't serve them well and with compassion, go find something else to do. And to her credit, she eventually did leave not long after. And so I think being mindful of that, and I've just been very open with you that I've been teaching for 21 years, and every year I check myself for burnout, and I have promised myself that the year that I think I'm not serving my kids is the year that I leave. So Mr. Rayfield in the book is really struggling with some mental health issues and other things, and he knows he doesn't want to be a teacher, but to his credit, he recognizes that he probably shouldn't stick around. And so I felt that was important to capture, because a lot of people enter the profession and it doesn't work for them, and that's okay. And that's okay, you know? probably work with those people, you're like, they retired and forgot to tell the school, right? Or they, like, what's going on here? Like, get out of here,
What advice would you give to the new teachers who maybe aren't bad at it, but are feeling like they're bad at it?
Well, everybody feels like they're bad at it first. I mean, everybody feels like that's one thing I would say, is you're gonna feel like you're bad at it. And my first year, I won, I'm not trying to brag, but like I won because I went through an alternative certification program, and I ended up winning like alternative certification program intern of the year for the whole state, okay? And I thought I was terrible, So everybody thinks that they're bad at first. And but what I would tell a new teacher is, first of all, to be very protective of their boundaries and really practice good self-care, because this job will eat you alive if you're not careful. And if you want to make it a career, you can't burn yourself. You can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, right? So I would tell that young teacher that they've got to set boundaries. They've got to go home. They've got to not grade out every minute of the day. That would be my first piece of advice. And then my second piece of advice is the children. I had kids I taught early in my career that, the kids I taught when I started are like well into their 30s. They've got kids and stuff. And some of them will find me on social media and stuff, and they'll be like, I loved your class. And I'm thinking, I didn't teach you anything. I didn't know what I was doing. I don't know how I won that intern of the year. What was I doing? But this is the thing. Kids will remember how you made them feel. They will remember how you made them feel. And if you make them feel seen, and if you make them feel valued, and if you can create a structure in your classroom that feels like they know, you can't make it a free-for-all because you can't be their best friend. That's a mistake a lot of young teachers make. You're not there to be their friend. But if you create a safe environment where they feel seen, heard, respected, and valued, but safe, then you're going to be okay. And then the learning part will happen.
Awesome. I lost my train of thought. Don't you hate when that happens?
It's okay. It happens to us all.
So, switching gears a little bit, Mr. Fitzsimmons, he's one of the really veteran teachers, right? He's one of the old school teachers where he stands up at the blackboard, not even the smart board, the blackboard, and he's writing. He's definitely one of the old school teachers. How do you feel about the switch from that old school teaching style to the new school of teaching style? Do you have any thoughts and opinions on that?
Yeah, so Mr. Fitzsimmons in the book, if you haven't read the book, he is so devoted to his chalkboard that when the school says we're going to take out all the chalkboards and put in these fancy smart boards, he says no. And they say, okay, you can keep your chalkboard, but you have to buy your own chalk and your own erasers, okay? So he is like old school. And I do kind of, there's a soft satirical element to this novel, right? Where I am sort of softly satirizing some trends in education. And I do think that we have moved a little too far into gamifying and gimmicking, and everything has to be a game, and everything has to be, and there have to be slide decks for everything, and there has to be all this other stuff. And to a degree, I'm a big believer. I make my kids get up, move around, I do 4 corners, find a partner, stand back to back and turn and talk. And I am not a believer, and I teach AP language, like I teach advanced juniors who probably could sustain me standing up there and lecturing. So I'm not saying I don't think we should be doing moving and stuff. But I do think sometimes there's a tendency in education to think that this shiny new way of doing things, this trick, this computer program, this software, whatever, this will be what fixes everything. And my word, at this point in my career, I have sat through so many PDs with, this is gonna do it, y'all, and it never is gonna do it. You know who's gonna do it? The human being in the classroom. And so, to me, my big belief is that we need to put human beings in the classroom and trust them. And if your way of doing it, Mr. Fitzsimmons gets results up there at the chalkboard, and the kids respect him, and he gets results, so let him teach that way. If you are the teacher with the games and stuff, and that's your vibe, and that's your jam, and you're doing it, and your kids are into it, then you do it that way. But the uniformity, and I'll be, again, I'm very honest and transparent. Why did I leave teaching Houston ISD? Because they brought in a superintendent that decided to treat me like I'm working in a factory, and I don't have children in front of me, I have widgets, and I refuse to be a part of a system like that.
And speaking of Mr. Fitzsimmons too, he has an interaction with Ms. Williams, who was spiraling a little bit and had started to develop a dependence on alcohol. How did you come up with that storyline? Just kind of, I guess, other than like humanizing the teachers to show that we're not angels and that we have our flaws, but what inspired that specifically?
Well, you know what? In March of 2026, I'll celebrate 5 years of living without alcohol, and so that story reflects my own journey in a lot of ways. Her problem, I think, had developed and was in a darker, sort of scarier place than my own story ever got, fortunately. But I was really kind of in a place, pandemic and all of that, teaching on Zoom, and I realized I was starting to center alcohol in a way that did not serve me anymore, and I just didn't want to live like that anymore. And so, a little over 4.5 years ago, I took it out of my life, and it's a big part of my identity now and a big part of my story. And so her chapter, I think, reflects that in a lot of ways. Her character, again, very different from me in a lot of important ways, but what I did really love about exploring her story is that she makes a connection with Mr. Fitzsimmons that you may not necessarily see coming. And, this is a workplace novel, right? We do spend so much, if you work, if you go to a workplace, right, if you're not, you spend, I spend more time with my colleagues a lot of the time than my own family. And, you end up having these relationships with people, and you may not necessarily, be friends with them outside of work, but they have an impact on your life. And so that chapter was trying to sort of show that these people we run into at our jobs sometimes have a huge impact on our lives.
Yeah. And throughout the course of the novel, almost every single character that you write about is a school teacher. Either are a teacher or were a teacher, with the exception of two characters. One is a student, and Nurse Honeycutt, who I'm not going to pick on the student this time, but as far as a school worker, right? It's Honeycutt, the nurse, is the only school worker who's not a classroom teacher at some point. Why did you pick the nurse as the non-classroom teacher voice?
And there is the custodian. The custodian is in the book, but she was a teacher. You're right. So there's a little secret. If you haven't read the book, there's a little spoiler there. But, when this story started as when this book was really just a series of short stories, I flashed on the plot for that chapter, and it obviously had to involve the nurse. And so that, I think, is why it's as simple as that. I had the story idea. I really loved the idea for that story, and I thought it has to involve the nurse, and I had her backstory in my head sort of instantly. So it wasn't, I don't think it was because it wasn't even a full novel yet. I think it wasn't even a calculated thought in that way. It just sort of was just I wanted to tell that particular story.
And I have to ask, why not the librarian?
Well, there is, if you read the book, there is a mention of the fact, because they meet in the library for a training, and there's a mention of the librarian at the high school has to, because again, budget cuts, that the librarian who works at Baldwin High has to also go and be the librarian at the middle school, because there's not enough money for each school to have a full-time librarian. They must work for Miles, I guess, but so there is a brief mention of her. And then I do remember thinking, and then there's I have people be like, why isn't there a coach, a football coach? And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So maybe I'll write a sequel one day. But the librarian is there, and she is beloved, but she's working way too hard, as all librarians.
What's really funny too is you mentioned Bel Air High School way back when, I don't even remember the year. My grandmother was the Bel Air librarian.
Oh, good.
Yeah. My sister went to, or my mother went to Bel Air High School. Yeah, Miss Betty. But speaking of writing a sequel, were there any characters that got cut from the final edition? Any stories that are left untold?
No, actually, that's a great question. There were no stories that were left untold. In fact, Ms. Jimenez, who has a small, one of the shorter chapters, Ms. Jimenez was an add-on. She was a background character, a very minor character, kind of a snarky, jokey one in the background. And when I was shaping this into more of a novel feel. My editor was like, I think we need to bring her out to the forefront. And plus, when I was trying to work in this Ashes storyline, it kind of worked out well. So if anything, I added with her character, yeah.
And I did notice that there is a kind of underlying current of punk in a lot of your novels. We have, spoiler alert, the principal was a little bit of a punk rock guy as you. Moxie was, you know, a little bit of punk. Were you a secret punk?
Yeah, oh, I wasn't even secret. Yeah, no one would think to look at me now because I'm a middle-aged high school English teacher. But yes, I was really into punk when I was young. I was really into rock and roll music in the 90s, and I had the back of my head shaved. And I wore Doc Martens, and I loved Bikini Kill. And so all of that is really, and I made scenes. So all of that is from my real life. And so the chapter with the principal being into punk, I put in a lot of little references and stuff that were fun for me to add in. But yes, and that chapter, I have to say, is probably my favorite chapter in the book, the chapter about the principal, because he is, he lived his life, his youthful life by this code of punk rock ethics. And then, as we all do, we grow up, if we're blessed and fortunate enough, we grow up and we have to figure out how to take our, values of our youth and figure out where we need to compromise to live in this world. And the tension that he was feeling as he's trying to figure that out was probably my favorite part of the story.
I will say that specific chapter is the chapter I was most on the edge of my seat for. And thank you for the way it ended, because I almost threw my book into the wall.
My mother texted me when she finished that chapter, and I won't spoil it if you haven't read the book, but my mother texted me when she finished that chapter, and she thanked me for that.
I'm not kidding you. I was sitting here like, don't you dare.
It's funny because it's so funny. So many people have said that to me that they were on the edge of their seats and they didn't know which way it was going to go. And that to me, because I always knew how it was going to end, I didn't think it was that. I was like, well, didn't you think that it would work out that way? And they were like, no. And I'm like, oh, sorry. So they were really on their seats, but in my mind, I thought it was clear. But anyway, many people echoed your thoughts.
Somewhere in the annotations I made, I even highlighted it and I said, thank you. And I wrote it on the page. Yes! Yes, this is the first book. Because I am a math girl, right? I was a middle school math teacher, and so this is my first annotated book. And so I was telling Miss Matthieu, excuse me, that's funny, earlier behind stage that I couldn't read this book for more than a couple chapters at a time because I was getting so emotional because I was a young teacher who ended up not pursuing that career. And, I'd finish a couple chapters and I would sit there like this, just because I had to process it. Because for a long time for me, at least personally, as a former teacher, I had been avoiding anything education-based. I didn't want to read about teachers. I didn't want to watch Abbott Elementary. I didn't want to watch moms. I didn't want to do anything school-related because there was so much trauma in my past from that. And so, as a former teacher who left, thank you. This was so touching. I felt so seen in this book. And I really hope that other educators and other school workers also feel seen and heard in this book.
Thank you.
So thank you for writing it. It's so fantastic.
Thank you.
With that, I want to open up the audience to questions. If you guys have any questions for the author, you have a mic or you can yell. But do you have any questions for Miss Jennifer? Don't all get up at once, please, please. Yes, ma'am.
Start writing. How did that evolve?
Oh, how did I start writing? And I just turned, can I turn this back on again, or is it going to do anything? I don't want to scare her. Yes, I'm kind of scared. Okay. There we go. Okay. So the question is, how did I start writing? Well, I heard the term womb writer once, and I think I really kind of came out of the womb writing. Funny enough, and a lot of people don't know this about me, my first language was Spanish. So my mother is a Cuban immigrant, and my father came here from Chile. And their plan for me was that I would speak Spanish at home and English outside the home. And I did. In fact, my little preschool report card, or whatever it was, little report said, Jennifer is learning English very well, and she didn't know much English when she started. She's learning very well. And it kind of blows my mind now that I'm an English teacher and I write books in English, right? And I've sadly lost some of my Spanish fluency because I would come home and be like, I want to speak English, right? So all this to say that even when I was still speaking in Spanish, I would come up with stories and tell my mother the stories, and she would write them. I would say, write the story down for me. Take it out, Mom, right? So she would write down, I would dictate the stories, she would write them down, and then I would illustrate them. And that's basically how it started. And then my first success, I guess you could say, when I was in 5th grade, I went to a little school that was K through 8, and every year there was a science fair, which I dreaded because I was not a science person, but I would do my best because I was a very dutiful student. Well, for whatever reason, when I was in 5th grade, and it only happened one time, they decided instead of a science fair, they're going to have a book fair, a creative writing fair, and everybody had to create a book. Well, I was loving it, right? Because I was writing poetry and stories and all kinds of things on my own. And so I wrote this little book called Mystery of Grandmas, and my mother, bless her, typed it up, I illustrated it, we bound it together, and I won for all the 5th graders, my book won. And then it went head to head with the winner of every grade, and my little 5th grade book, Mystery of Grandmas, beat out the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. I was the winner for the whole school. And my prize was it got to go into the school library for a year, and kids could check it out. And I would go in there and see if it had been checked out. They had a card in the little Dewey Decimal, the little pull-out drawer. I had a card in there. And I'm like, of course the library was my happy place. And so I would go in there and see it, and kids check it out. And then at the end of the year, they gave it to me, and the little card with the ka-chonk, ka-chonk, how they would stamp and stuff, that satisfying sound. And you could see all the kids that had read that book. And I got such a high off of that. And so that really was my journey. I was a journalism major. My immigrant parents said, we're not going to send you to school to be a writer. Like, what kind of English, what kind of job are you going to get as an English major? And of course, you can get a lot of jobs as an English major. But my immigrant parents were like, if you want to be a writer, you can major in journalism. And so I was a journalist for a time, and I did write, in that way. But really, my career as a teacher is what got me writing fiction, because my own students were reading young adult, and I wanted to try it. So that's how it all kind of came to be.
Yes, ma'am, in the white.
Did all of the individual stories come out of the story about the ashes and proceeding, or did that story come after all of the individuals?
So the ashes story came after.
Okay.
Yeah, the ashes story came after. I had written several individual stories. Oh, can they hear me? Let's see, can you hear me? Yeah, so I had written several individual stories, sold them or took them to an editor, and my editor sadly said, short story collections do not sell. Unfortunately, short story collections don't sell, so let's knit these together. And that's when the Ashes storyline, I came up with that and kind of knitted them together. So the Ashes storyline, I had to go through in revisions and, kind of add that all.
So you have two endings to this book. One could be the principal story, and I won't spoil it, and then the actual chapter that it ended on. So how did you choose the ending?
So funny enough, the story, so we needed an ending. The ending, the last story was Ms. Brennan's story, but it didn't, my editor said, we need an end, we need another ending, we need a real button. And I said, I'd love to share Mr. Lair's first day on the job. And so that was the last thing that I wrote. And when I tell you, I'll become emotional, like the way I cried writing that chapter, I knew it was the right ending for the book. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I think there was another one right there. Yeah.
How do you incorporate your two careers, writing and teaching?
How do I incorporate my two careers? Well, I would say that it's probably been a benefit to me to be a teacher because, well, for a lot of reasons, but also when you are trying to write full time, you become dependent on your writing income in a way that it can be kind of scary, and that can also force you to write things you don't want to write just to get paid, right? So because I've always had my teaching salary, it's given me the freedom to sort of really write what I want to write. I write a lot in the summertime. I write a lot on breaks. I've trained myself to write in little snippets. I'll do half an hour here, 45 minutes here, kind of like the idea of exercise. You just do a little bit at a time, but over time you reap benefits. And so that's kind of how I do it. If I actually tried to write full-time 8 hours a day, every day, I'd probably not be mentally well, right? It's like I need to go out into the world a little bit. So I just kind of work it in as I can. And most writers have day jobs, right? Most writers have day jobs. That's the truth of it. And I'm very fortunate that my day job has been a job that's brought me so much satisfaction. Yeah.
How long did it take you to write the faculty lounge?
I would say it took me a little, I'm supposed to wait to answer the microphone, I'm so sorry, Kenneth's only like, wait to be. Can you hear me now? Okay. So I think it took me a little over a year to write all of the stories. And then, of course, the revising process with my editor from Dayton. It was another couple of months of revising, you know, and then it goes through a whole copy editing and proofreading process and all of that. So, yeah.
Write just one book at a time, you've written so many.
Yes, I only write one book at a time. There are writers that are able to just kind of jump around. I don't know how they do it, but yeah, the faculty lounge was my focus, yeah, for a long time.
I'm curious, and personal question, but are your parents good with you in this 21-year career that you had?
Well, my parents are very proud of me, yes. My sweet parents, they don't live here in Houston, they live in Washington, right outside of Washington, D.C. And I do remember when I happened to be visiting them when my very first novel, The Truth About Alice, sold in 2014. That book came out, and it sold in 2012. And I remember my dad just like broke down in tears because he was so proud of me. And yes, they're very proud. And you know, and I tease them all the time about like, why did you let me be an English major? You know? But they joke about it. They're like, well, you turned out okay. You know, if you're the child of immigrants, you know, you don't mess around. It's like my mother's like, I came here on a boat at the age of 11 with no parents. Like, you can't tell, you know, don't complain. So, which is true. My mother did. And so, you know, they're very proud of me, and I'm very grateful to them for their support.
In the back.
Hi. I missed the very beginning, so I apologize if we talked about this a little bit, but I love the book. I've never been a teacher. I don't think I have the skills to ever be a teacher, but as a public policy person, we need more teachers and really, really good teachers for this country. I think that's where my, young men and women, and yet in the book you had the character whose parents said you should go to law or finance, and nobody is really telling their kids, oh, go be a teacher, or it seems like it's only I had a grandmother who was a teacher, my dad was a teacher. Is there a pipeline for teachers in this country? And I know Barack Obama had tried to elevate the teaching profession to say we really need to revere teachers, and I don't feel like, especially in Texas, that's happening, but where is that pipeline? Are there teachers out there advocating and recruiting people to be teachers and stay? And really, I mean, I would love to find a way economically that the market would pay teachers a little more than what they do.
Yeah, well, we have a real crisis on our hands because the truth of the matter is, and I can tell you as someone in my 21st year, you are no longer, I feel like I am part of the last generation that made this a career, right? Like the people that I know that are teaching 20, and at this point, I'm not trying to be depressing or anything. I'm so deep into the pension that I've got to really be careful. Like if I were to leave teaching, I'd probably need to go work at U of H or something, and so I can stay within the pension system. But there comes a like that. I really think that like the younger teachers coming in, they're doing 3-4 years, and they're getting out because they're not being paid enough. They're not being treated really more than they're not being paid enough. They're not being treated well. They're being treated like absolute garbage, honestly. The way that and this is not the profession I joined 21 years ago. It has changed. The obsession with test scores, the obsession with metrics, the obsession with children as widgets. There's no respect for the profession. Then you have society saying we're, every cultural flashpoint, listen, if I can indoctrinate my students, I would indoctrinate them to bring pencils to class. So, it's really hard out there right now. And I mean it when I say, and I don't like saying this, but I mean it when I say, I don't know. If I had a young person come to me and say, should I be a teacher? I might say, go teach in Massachusetts or go teach in a private school. And I hate saying that. But, all I can do is bring attention to it, but we need to fund the schools. We're not funding schools, and we're treating teachers like garbage. It's horrible. And I don't know the solution other than, I know the solution for sure is funding. And then just like hopefully a break in this depolarization in which we find ourselves, that is, teachers in schools have been at the brunt of, have had to deal with a lot of that, right? Thank you for your question and for your concern. But yeah, we're in real trouble because there isn't a pipeline. There isn't. People aren't becoming, they're not doing it. And they're not doing it, here's the thing. There's research to support this, and Mike Miles doesn't want to hear this. There is extensive research that proves that you get better and better and better. You don't max out at 5 years and then just teach the same way. I am better now than I was 10 years ago and 10 years before that. And so what's happening is we're getting these kids coming in, they do Teacher America, they do their tour of duty, then they go to law school. And I'm not saying they're not working hard, but they're not becoming great at it because it takes about 5 years to become great. And then they tap out. And why wouldn't they? So if you want a cohort of people, of careerists that are going to get better and better and better, then you need to treat people better.
So I have two questions. One is, what do your students think about your fame? And the second, perhaps, because the last question more importantly, what can just general members of the community, I don't even have kids, what can we do to support teachers in our local community?
Donate pencils.
Thank you for your question and for asking that. My students are totally, they don't care. I mean, they are so sweet, and they are aware that, and they'll ask me questions, but really they just want to know, like, when's the test on the grade test. I did have a student one time find Moxie on my classroom shelves, and she said, oh, she watched the movie. She said, oh, I didn't know Moxie was a book. And I said, yeah, I wrote it. And she goes, what are you doing here then? Kids are terrible. I will never forget it. It was so funny. Then I brought her a signed copy of the book and stuff. It was really hilarious. And so they are curious. And the kids that are interested in creative writing and stuff, they'll pick my brain and they'll talk to me. But for the most part, they see me as their English teacher, and that's how I like it. In terms of how you can support teachers, well, for sure, vote and contact your representatives and all of that, and write letters to the editor and advocate and educate yourself. A lot of people don't realize that there's not been significant funding of Texas public schools since 2019. They don't know. And so, advocate for that. But then small things like your local public school, or especially if it's a Title I public school, like bring a big thing of Kleenex to the front office. Bring pencils. Bring Ticonderoga. I buy my own pencils. I buy my own Kleenex. I buy my own hand sanitizer. Like I do. And so, bring supplies, and it will be used, and they will be grateful for that. It's an easy thing to do that brings a lot of joy. So thank you for that. I know you, Mr. Roscoe. We worked together at Bel Air.
Are you working on a second adult novel? And if so, can you tell us something about it?
Ooh, sneak peeks.
I am working on something now, but the market right now it's hard to sell books. People don't want to buy books right now because we don't know what's happening in our world, right? And so I have written something, and we're going to see if it gets published. And the truth is it might not. The market is really tight out there. The faculty lounge has sold very well, which is good for me in terms of trying to sell another book. So I am working on something. It's set in a prep school. It involves teachers, but a little different than faculty lounge. It's more like sliding doors, like if I had done this different. It's a very midlife novel, and I don't have a title for it just yet. So I don't know. I'm in the development stages of it. And it may or may not see the light of day. People don't know that I've had 2 books that never saw the light of day. They didn't sell, right? Even though I've had a lot of success, I've had times where it's not. And so we'll see what happens with this one. But I do know that I'll keep writing. Whatever happens next, I'll keep writing. For the time being, I see myself still continuing to write for adults. I'm not saying I would never write for young adults again, but at the point I'm at in my career, my life, I feel called at this point to mostly write for adults. Thank you for your question, Mr. Rosso. And Mr. Rosso, who was a German teacher at Bel Air, is the only person to ever point out to me, he got it. If you've read the faculty lounge, Mr. Lehr is the German word for teacher. So, and I put that in there as a little Easter egg. I don't speak German. I don't know. It was just like I was trying to come up with his name, and so Mr. Mr. Rosso.
It's a good game. I just want to say that last chapter, that was the one that got me the most.
Well, Mr. Rosso, you did good work. You did good work for all those years, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. The students were so lucky to have you.
I think I saw you.
I was just gonna say, so that, Amy Fuller has not optioned faculty lounge.
Amy Fuller has not optioned faculty lounge. There is, I have an agent at CAA, and she has shopping lounge around, and there's been some interest, so we'll see. But that's, there's been some interest to actually becoming a show is a long, crazy journey. But keep your ears to the ground. Maybe something will happen soon.
I can see it.
Yes, ma'am, in the black.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say, I'm a teacher. I'm in my 24th year of teaching right now. And when I read this book, it was like I was nodding along. I'm nodding at everything that you're saying right now. It made me laugh. It made me cry. It was all the emotions. And just thank you for celebrating educators.
Well, thank you. I see you, and I just want you to know I see you, and thank you for that. And I got to tell you something. If you're a teacher in this room who's read the book, there is a scene where they're in this horrible training there's someone from the district that she taught for, no offense, but she taught for 2 years now. You didn't stick around to say, it would you'd come in and be like, now I'm going to tell you how to teach, right? Okay, you were like, I'm going to go work for the library, right? Okay, but in the book, this character teaches for 2 years, and then she comes to do a training, and these veteran teachers are sitting there listening to her, right? And there's a scene where they put a parking lot chart paper up, and my editor said, I think this is too inside baseball. We're not gonna, and I said, the parking lot chart paper stays.
About that scene. 20-minute explanation of what this thing is.
It stays. And then I'm in a training that fall with the parking lot, and I took a picture and I sent it to my editor, and I said, this is why it stays.
Well, I never worked in education, but the book made me think of my favorite, high school teachers, and I was just wondering if there's a teacher from your childhood that really made an impression on you, and if that person made it to this book, or if there's like a story that you would like to share.
That is such a sweet question. Thank you. I had many, many, many teachers that, of course, had a huge impact on me in my life. There are two that jump out to me in high school. Margie Carson, who was my journalism teacher and the sponsor of my school newspaper, and I was the editor-in-chief of the paper. And I remember, I would cut up in the newspaper, I would get all kind of silly, and she would say, and I went by Jenny in high school, and she'd say, Jenny, you need to calm down. Because I would get all kind of silly and stuff, and she was just hilarious. She adored me, and she took us to on a field trip. She took all of us to Columbia University for a high school journalism workshop. And now I look back and I thought, that woman took a bunch of teenagers to New York City. I'm like, what on earth, and the bus broke down, we had to take the subway, and she's just like, come on. And so and I'm still in touch with her. And so Margie Carson, and then I had my AP literature teacher, Beverly Gilbert, and she had a Southern accent, and she came to school on a motorcycle, and she had a brother named Butch, and we sat in a little circle, and man, she made us read. I was reading James Joyce, I was reading Virginia Woolf, I was reading Ralph Ellison, I was reading some tough stuff in there, and she treated us like real readers, and that's what I mean when I say teaching isn't a factory line. And I'm not being offensive to people who work in a factory, but it's got to be tailored to the kids. So you have a bunch of 12th grade AP literature teachers, students, a bunch of book nerds. You need to let them be book nerds, and she taught us that way. So those are two that jump out to me.
Any others?
What great questions! Thank you, y'all. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any from our online audience? No? Well, if that's all the questions, then thank you again so much for coming. We have some copies of Faculty Lounge available in the back for purchase, and Miss Jennifer will be signing, so stick around for that. I see some of you already have your copies as well, but thank you all for joining us.
Leanne, thank you so much. Leanne, what a wonderful job. Let's hear it for Leanne. everybody.